Have you ever noticed how some people seem to learn things incredibly fast? They pick up a new skill, understand a concept, remember information, and move on, while everyone else is still trying to figure out the basics. In school, at work, in sports, even in video games, there's always that one person who just seems to get it faster than everyone else. Most people assume those people are just smarter, or that they were born with a better memory, or maybe they just got lucky. But psychology tells a very different story. Learning faster usually has very little to do with raw intelligence, and much more to do with habits, small, almost invisible behaviors that change how the brain processes information. Imagine two people trying to learn the same thing, maybe a new language, or how to code, or how to play guitar. One person studies for hours, rereads notes again and again, and still feels stuck. The other person studies less, but somehow improves faster. It seems unfair, but the difference is often not effort, it's how the effort is used. Fast learners don't necessarily work harder, they just work in a way that their brain remembers. One thing fast learners do differently is that they don't try to understand everything perfectly the first time. Most people stop themselves constantly while learning. They reread the same sentence 5 times, replay the same explanation, and refuse to move on until everything is crystal clear. But fast learners are comfortable being confused for a while. They move forward even when they only understand 60%, because they know something important about the brain. Understanding often comes later, not during the first exposure. The brain loves patterns, and patterns only appear after you see something multiple times. So instead of trying to understand everything immediately, fast learners collect pieces and let their brain connect them later. Another thing they do is they test themselves constantly, even when they feel unprepared. Most people study by reading and highlighting, which feels productive but is actually one of the least effective ways to learn. Fast learners do something uncomfortable instead. They close the book, look away from the screen, and try to remember what they just learned. It feels harder and sometimes frustrating, but psychologically it's much more powerful. Every time you try to remember something, you strengthen the memory. It's like doing a push-up for your brain. Reading feels easy, but remembering builds strength. Fast learners also make more mistakes. And this sounds strange because people usually think the best learners are the ones who make the fewest mistakes. But psychologically, mistakes are one of the fastest ways to improve. When you make a mistake, your brain pays attention. It's almost like the brain highlights the moment and says, "This is important, don't do this again." People who learn slowly often try to avoid mistakes because mistakes feel bad. Fast learners expect mistakes. They treat them like feedback, not failure. So they actually move forward faster because they're not afraid to be wrong. There's also something else interesting about people who learn quickly. They explain things to themselves as if they were teaching someone else. Even when they're alone, they might say things like, "Okay, so this works like this because," and they talk through the idea in simple words. Psychologists sometimes call this the teach-to-learn effect. When you explain something in simple language, you expose the parts you don't really understand yet. It forces your brain to organize information instead of just recognizing it. Recognition is not learning. Organization is learning. Another habit fast learners have is that they take breaks at the right time. This sounds counterintuitive because we usually think learning faster means studying longer. But the brain doesn't work like a machine. It works more like a muscle. If you use it non-stop, it gets tired and stops improving. But when you study, then rest, then come back later, your brain actually processes information in the background. This is why sometimes you suddenly understand something hours later, the next day. Your brain was still working on it without you noticing. And maybe one of the most important habits is that fast learners stay curious. Not motivated all the time, not disciplined all the time, but curious. They ask small questions constantly. Why does this work like that? What happens if I change this? How does this connect to something else I know? Curiosity turns learning from a chore into a puzzle, and the brain loves puzzles. When you're curious, you don't have to force yourself to learn. You naturally pay attention, and attention is the doorway to memory. If you look at all these habits together, something interesting appears. Fast learners are not necessarily smarter, more talented, or more gifted. They're just more comfortable being confused, making mistakes, testing themselves, explaining things simply,
resting when needed, and staying curious. In other words, they work with their brain instead of against it. So if you've ever felt like you're a slow learner, it might not be true at all. Maybe no one ever showed you how learning actually works. Maybe you thought learning was about reading more, studying longer, and trying harder, when in reality, it's more about testing, failing, explaining, resting, and staying curious. And maybe the real difference between fast learners and everyone else is not their brain, but their relationship with not knowing. Fast learners are not afraid of not understanding yet. They are comfortable being beginners, and that might be the biggest advantage of all. So the next time you struggle to learn something and feel like everyone else is moving faster than you, remember this: learning fast is not about being smarter. It's about building small habits that make your brain remember better. And the good news is, habits can be learned by anyone. If this made you think a little differently about how learning works, you might want to stick around for more psychology videos like this, so consider subscribing to the channel. I'd also love to hear in the comments, what is something that took you a long time to learn, but once you understood it, it suddenly felt easy? Because sometimes learning faster isn't about moving quicker, but about finally understanding how your mind actually learns.